Welcome to Mentoring Moments. Mentoring Moments is a sub-series of the eCommerce Edge podcast. It is composed of clips taken from Jason's one-to-one and group mentorship sessions. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the podcast. And this episode is going to be a little bit of a unique one. As everybody probably knows by now, I have the Mentoring Moments episodes, which are primarily clips taken from my mentorship sessions with mentees and key takeaways, things that I think will be super helpful and useful to the audience. But we also do some guest episodes where we have some guest mentors come in, share some interesting knowledge with us on specific topics. The last one that we had was Jonathan Day, and he came in, he talked about headless commerce, where it works, where it doesn't, and really giving some key mentorship ideas and concepts about headless to our audience. Now, it is my pleasure to welcome Ryan Imlach, and he is from Sunshower Online in Australia. Welcome to the pod, Ryan.
Thank you for having me, Jason. It's a pleasure to join you again.
Yeah, no, it's awesome to have you along for the ride today. And how we originally met was you were struggling in your business around some of the back office systems, some of the limitations of inventory management, some of the limitations of order management. And so I helped you, and this is going back, must be over a year now, must be 14, 15 months now, I think, when we first started talking. I made a recommendation. Yeah. I think it was about that long. So you've been in this this learning process for a while now. And at that time, I made a recommendation that you consider looking at NetSuite for an ERP replacement in the business. You ultimately decided to go with NetSuite, and you've been implementing NetSuite for, it takes a long time to implement a new ERP, and it's an uphill climb, but you're now there. You're now on the backside of that. It's leveled up your business. It's allowed you to expand and grow in ways you wouldn't have been able to do any other way. But that's not what we're going to talk about today. You emailed me and you said, hey, not only is NetSuite working great for us, and it's raised the ceiling on how much we can scale, but more importantly, I'm figuring out ways to introduce AI and ChatGPT specifically into the business that is allowing me to take more ownership of my NetSuite implementation instead of having to turn to a partner for every little thing that we need changed or modified or adding some custom suite script. You can do a lot of that yourself, and you were really excited about that. Instead of having this super high dependency on partners for every little piece of your back office, now you can own a lot more of that yourself. So maybe you could talk a little bit about what prompted you to send the email, and then we can get into a little bit more about how you're integrating AI into your operations on a daily basis.
Yes, Jason, I've been listening to your podcast and loving every moment of it, particularly your B2B stuff, because that's where we're looking at getting into even more, and so much gold, so thank you. And yes, it just made me think about when we jumped onto NetSuite on your recommendation, and I was really excited about, it raising our ceiling with data visibility. But then, think back 14 months, ChatGPT was not on anyone's radar. And even when we moved on in November, ChatGPT wasn't on anyone's radar. And we've moved into NetSuite and discovered automations and workflows and save searches, which already are such a level up on what we were doing, impossible in our old platforms. And then ChatGPT comes along, and ChatGPT 3, and I decided I'm going to just try. It says it can write code. I'm going to try and write some suite script. And sure enough, I wrote it, and it wrote out some code that looked right. I would say I benefit from knowing what looks right and knowing how it works, but I don't know how to write code myself. I certainly couldn't write a script from scratch. And I plugged it in the system, and it didn't work. It looked right, and it didn't work. And I had the opinion that ChatGPT was the equivalent to the loudest guy in the room who spoke with conviction. It all looks right and it all looks good, but if you don't know what he's saying or they're saying, they could very well be wrong. And that sort of felt like that. And then ChatGPT 4 came along, and I thought, okay, if it's this exponentially better improvement, I'm going to try it again. And sure enough, I gave it some simple prompts on a user event script. After working with other partners and understanding how user event scripts work and client-side scripts work. This is very specific NetSuite chat, but asked it what I wanted it to do, and it wrote out some scripts, and I was like, I don't know how to implement this. It says, okay, this is how you implement it, this is how you deploy it, and sure enough, I followed the steps, and I had a working suite script without needing a partner, being told how the script works, because you can work with a partner and ask them to write a script for you, and sure, it plugs in and goes, but I don't know how it works, I don't know how it plugs in, so if I ever need to make an adjustment, I've got to go back to them. But now with the way ChatGPT writes a script and explains a script for me, I can take NetSuite to levels I didn't imagine I could.
And I think you point out a really good thing, that you're not the only one to discover that ChatGPT, the older versions of it in particular, had what we call hallucinations or hallucination events. And I noticed that when on the old version of ChatGPT, when I was asking it questions around Mexico or where should I go, or what are the best parks, or what is the closest nearest green park to Guanajuato, for example, and it said, oh, this is one and it's 15 minutes away from where you are, and I looked it up on Google Maps and it was like an hour and a half away. And there's definitely situations where ChatGPT, quote unquote, hallucinates, it makes stuff up, and it makes it sound 100% believable in the way that it presents the information to you. It makes it sound 100% believable, and I think that's obviously what you experienced the first time around, is this hallucination, because you don't know enough about SuiteScript to challenge it or question it or review it or be the editor, play the editor of the content.
Yeah.
You just have to accept it as true, and that's what didn't work. But then as ChatGPT has gotten better, the amount of hallucinating that it does has reduced. Sure, the answers, as I understand it, are a lot more incomplete than maybe what they were under ChatGPT 3.5. So they're maybe not as in-depth. It's harder to maybe get answers out of the platform, but the answers you do get tend to be a lot more accurate as a result. Now, if we talk about SuiteScript, for those that don't know, and for those who haven't ever looked at NetSuite before, SuiteScript is a scripting language that's unique to NetSuite, but it's similar to JavaScript. So if a developer has experience with JavaScript and they know how to understand and read JavaScript and create JavaScript, they can pick up SuiteScript pretty bloody fast. It requires minimal amounts of retraining. However, if you're not a coder at all and you don't come from a coding background, you don't come from a development background, it all seems like Greek, just like HTML5 seems like Greek, or CS seems like Greek, or anything to do with server-side scripting or anything seems like Greek. And so I guess what this does is it gives us mere mortals who are not developers, because I'm not a developer either, it gives us superpowers. It takes us from being a non-coder to still a non-coder, but a non-coder that can implement code that has been created by a system that knows how to write that code better than we ever could, even if we were a developer.
Yes, and it makes me think of, I feel like my strength in the business in the past has been along the lines of a non-technical or maybe slightly technical, but I wouldn't never write code, a product manager. Someone who knows what JavaScript is. They might have done a little code camp or something like that. They know what a variable is and know the general structure of JavaScript. I would say that's my level. And now I can go, I know how JavaScript works. I'm going to ask it in that logic, include the variables that I need, so the custom fields or the default fields in NetSuite. This is how I want them to behave against each other. And then it can spit out an output. And it might not be correct, but when that error comes back, I can put that back in, and it can go, I can see, I wrote this with this in mind, this is how I should write it, I'm going to correct it. And then it writes a correction. But the thing that I find the most interesting about ChatGPT is that we can go around in circles, like we can. I can do this, an error can come back, and then I'll spit it back in again. Another error will come back, very similar, and I have to look at the code and go, it looks like there's a variable that I asked it about that's gone missing here in our chat. It's just been missed. It just dropped off the chain. And go, I think this variable needs to be considered again. Or maybe you're looking up a record and you're looking at it by its title when it would make more sense for it to be by its ID. And I'll say, you should look up by the ID, internal ID, or ID instead. And it goes, that's a way better way of doing it. I'm going to do that instead. So ChatGPT is totally capable of doing it, but it might not think of it first. I've almost found like it's working with a person. Like we're on a team, we're sitting around a table, and we're thinking about ideas to get this job done.
Well, you've got a developer sitting alongside you effectively.
Yeah, which is really interesting because my experience with partners and that implementing SweetScript for me was it turns out that's what it was anyway because I wasn't that confident in giving them access to my system. So I'd rather watch them see how they do it and understand how it works just to get started before I know them. And they'll plug it in, they'll get an error back and they'll go, oh, that's the mistake, I'm going to fix that. That's how the person does it.
Yes, it's exactly iterative in exactly the same way that ChatGPT is. And I think what you've described it is what has become known colloquially as prompt engineering, which is effectively someone who, and there's roles out there listed on Seek and lots of other job boards now for prompt engineers for AI systems. And it's effectively knowing how to ask really good questions of ChatGPT or any large language model, and then knowing how to refine those queries in exactly the way that you've described, which is, okay, if I get an error back or I don't get the response that I exactly was expecting for whatever reason, I now can refine my query in a conversational two-way way in such a way that I eventually refine down the responses to get the response that I was actually looking for when I first asked the query. And this is I think of it as and I'm old enough to remember this, and you might be too, but a lot of the audience may not be. I'm dating myself here. But I remember in the early days of Google that you didn't just start out as an expert Googler. You didn't just start out as someone who could find anything online just because you were using Google. You learned the way over time that you could get the best response out of Google by crafting your query in such a way that you got the right response, that you got linked to the correct website, and maybe you would modify the question, and you'd maybe take out words or add synonyms, or you would do different things until you got the response from Google that you were looking for. And it feels very much like ChatGPT is going down that similar path in that you have to figure out over time, just by exposure to it, how it thinks, for lack of a better term, and then over time your queries, even your first query, gets better out of the box.
Yeah, and I find that really interesting. It's totally true, and I've had the same thought. And I've been sitting there next to my colleagues and working on this, and I sit there and I'll be prompting it, and I'll go down a chain of 25, 30 prompts, get told I have to wait 2 hours to... This is just to solve one problem, to do it again. And I'm sitting there going, I can't believe this is doing this, and this is what it takes. Like, at the moment, I really think ChatGPT 4 is, and I'm not trying to blow my own trumpet or anything like that, but it's more me just testing the limits of the platform. I don't think a lot of people will be able to reach into the depth or how far ChatGPT can go for you. You know what I mean? Like, prompt engineering is, it can go so deep and so nuanced based on what you've prompted it before. I don't know how the general working population yet, how deep and patient they would be going into it.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? I'm not using my words
basically.
Right.
Like, it would be difficult to explore the limits of ChatGPT in a single session. Because exactly like you, when I'm trying to put something together, or I was trying to maybe write, for example, I used ChatGPT to write a bit of an ad that I wanted to be translated into an animated ad, basically. And what I found was when it gave me information back, if I basically copied and pasted that back in and I tweaked it a little bit and I say, okay, I want that, but then I want it to be a bit more like this, and I give it a bit more instruction and I give it a little bit more detail, then it would give me a whole bunch more back. And like you did, taking what it gives you, giving it to it back, but then modifying it, tweaking it slightly with a little bit more context, you get the results that you get by doing that are phenomenal. And so, for example, if it might give me, let's just say hypothetically you ask ChatGPT to give you a business plan, and here's the rough outline of the business, and here's what your goals are, blah, 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 and you get it to document it, and maybe item number 3, for example, doesn't make sense, or it doesn't quite fit what you want. If you paste that back in and you say, this was a good idea, but I really wanted it to be more like X, Y, and Z, then it will rewrite that in a very cohesive way, even to the point where when, for example, I've been asking ChatGPT in the case of maybe creating a sub-series for a podcast, and I want it to use alliteration, and then I'll give it the topic, and then I'll tell it what I want, and then it will give me 10 different options, 10 different answers. And those are answers that, sure, maybe I would have come up with those over hours and hours worth of thought. And even if I don't use one of those 10, it prompts my brain, okay, this is the direction that I need to go. These are the types of things I need to think of. So I think you're 100% right. I think it used to be getting from 0 to 1 was the hardest part of creating content or writing code or anything. It was that 0 to 1 piece that was the hardest bit and took the most mental creativity. But what I find with ChatGPT is it will get you 0 to 1, and even if you have to get it from 1 to 4 or 1 to 5 or 1 to 10, it's that first bit that is the biggest hurdle. And if it can give you that sort of inspiration, then you can take it the rest of the way.
Yeah, totally. And then the implications process-wise, or where you can go from next. So I think of what I'm doing with NetSuite, and basically I've managed to create some sort of pricing automation engine. So we don't have to set prices anymore based off purchase prices. You've got margins. It automatically does it, and it's amazing. That removes the need for a person where an irrigation expert in our company has to spend let's say 80% of his time on pricing. Now he doesn't have to do that, and he can be an irrigation expert armed with ChatGPT to better serve our market, whether that's with content or anything with a business, but using their irrigation experts,
or product sourcing, or looking at new markets and looking where gaps are in new markets. And there's so many different things that you can do with your time if you're not doing this manual, repetitive crap in an ERP.
Yes, and all this free time can be used to, if your workers or your employees have more time to explore things like ChatGPT, where your opportunity is growing exponentially so compared to the others that are still bogged down in the admin world. I just think if you can get organised on that side, the opportunities are only even more fruitful, or opportunity. I forget the word.
Yeah, there's more opportunities, I think. And if you had to put a percentage on it, and you had to estimate how much more efficient you guys are as a business, not just by using ChatGPT, but using the automations that you've already put into place, is it 20%? Is it 40%? Is it 60%? How much more efficient, if you just finger in the air, how much more efficient do you think you've become by using ChatGPT and its outputs?
I would hazard to say we've doubled. We're double the amount of work that we need to spend. Twice as efficient. Yeah, it's
wow.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Okay, so
and we didn't expect that. Yeah.
And would you say that everyone else on the team is as excited about this as you are, or has this been you've had to drag people kicking and screaming towards using ChatGPT on the daily?
Yeah, no, that's been the harder challenge, and I think it's more everyone is pretty happy with how they've been working and how they've been doing things, and it's just starting to convince people that spending a little bit more time in this space, you will get a lot out of it, and all it will do is turbocharge your abilities. It's not going to take over your abilities. My comment that I say to a lot of the people that I've spoken to about ChatGPT is, it is so useful when you know your subject matter. That's when it really comes into its own, and you really get something out of it. Otherwise, you're at its mercy about if you don't know what you're doing. You can really put something out there that's frankly wrong.
Yeah,
but if
look, sorry to interrupt. I think what you just said is so accurate in the sense that I was listening to a business podcast recently, and I listened to a few different business podcasts, and the interviewer had a guest on that was a professional writer. That's what they did for a living. And he used ChatGPT to write an entire book. But it was through his genius prompt engineering that he was able to get. Now, he had to make some edits and he had to play the role of the editor, basically, when he got this book back. But he live on air went through some of his prompts, because he started to document his prompts, and he now has started to sell courses on prompt engineering and was providing sample prompts for people to use for different tasks for different jobs. And we see this as an exploding industry all on its own. On Udemy, you can see prompt engineering courses, etc. But it was quite phenomenal how he was able to take a simple response and through a process of prompt engineering and through very smart, very clever, refined questions, able to get to a final response that was just mind-blowing, absolutely mind-blowing. And he did it live on air, and they described what they were seeing ChatGPT respond with, and then he said, now, this is what I'm going to type in next. I've copied and pasted this in. Now this is the response ChatGPT is giving. Now this is the next refinement I'm giving it. This is the next response. And I was just absolutely floored, because if I had gone down that same path with the same goal in mind, I probably wouldn't have gotten anywhere near the quality outcome that he did. And so what you're saying is absolutely right. He's a subject matter expert on the thing he was writing about, and so therefore he could ask super smart questions and get super smart responses.
Yeah, and I think it only raises the imperative of allowing your employee, your subject matter expert employees to be subject matter experts as often as they can. And that's what everyone wants to do. You want to be your expert. So now, armed with this, it only amplifies.
And what I think I had a conversation with someone else yesterday about ChatGPT, and what we came to the conclusion was, if you're a really pretty shit employee today, and either you're having a hard time getting hired, or you are having a hard time getting a raise, or getting accelerated within the business and getting promoted within the business, this is going to take a pretty resoundingly average employee that maybe doesn't have a lot of motivation, and it's going to make them a pretty mediocre or even better employee pretty quickly if they really dive into this pretty hardcore. And it's going to take your mediocre employees, and it's going to make them superstars pretty quickly if they devote themselves to this. And it's going to take your superstars, and it's going to make them almost like gods, and it's going to make them almost seem like they've got the power of 2 or 3 employees within the business. And so I think it almost doesn't matter what level you start at, either on a subject or from a skill set perspective, it's going to amplify that substantially. Would you tend to agree with that?
Yes, I would absolutely tend to agree. But I guess, yes, if everyone is starting from different starting points, and magnifying the factor of magnitude is greater for those that are already starting higher. So it really, I did read an article the other day talking about Australia and productivity, and saying that productivity is low and they want it to get up there. What about those countries where productivity is high, armed with this thing? Are they going to, that factor of magnitude, is that going to that gap become even wider? It's possible.
I think we're already seeing it. And even I've seen some pretty scary things by investors, mainly in the area of research, that I listened to a few investment podcasts, and This Week in Startups with Jason Calacanis, and a few different. I try to take in a wide variety of inputs from a content perspective. But what I find is that in almost all cases, what they're saying is it is now supercharging the time gap between, for example, if you're an investor and or let's say you're a broker, or let's say you're doing something and you're a high net worth advisor or something like that. You maybe used to have 2 or 3 interns on your team that would be going out and doing investment research, doing interviews with company founders, and collecting data and poring over quarterly reports and annual reports to pull out data. And what they're saying is now with ChatGPT, they don't need an intern to do that. They can, with good prompt engineering, ChatGPT can go out and do all that research. It can go out and it can pore over an annual report. It can pull out the key pieces of data. It can summarize it, or you can feed it a CSV file, a spreadsheet, and it can pull out key pieces of information or data and present it in a visual way that you wouldn't be able to do any other way. You'd need almost a data scientist or data analyst to do the same type of work that it can do almost instantaneously. So that feels to me like, sure, it's maybe not going to eliminate interns, but those interns are going to need to learn how to be experts with ChatGPT so that they can put that on their resume, and they can say, hey, if you're looking for somebody who's a really good prompt engineer and can help you become more efficient using ChatGPT, I'm putting my hand up because I can definitely bring some massive skill set to the table. It's almost like you used to be able to put expert Googler on your CSV, and that meant something. It doesn't mean anything anymore, but it used to. And so I feel like that's what's coming for ChatGPT.
And then I guess this sort of brings up a thing I wanted to raise with you it was Henry from Mutinex, from your other podcast. I had already listened to that one actually, and one of the gold things he talked about was all of these small businesses, startups taking on Goliath's multinationals because they were so rigid and fixed in. It's just the nature of the beast. Once you get that big, it's harder to move, harder to turn. Us as a small business here, we feel like we can now achieve things that these massive businesses can do with so fewer resources. The challenge, I suppose, now is for those big businesses, is how can they implement things like ChatGPT, where with this exponential growth or superpowers, how can they make that happen in a big business? Can they? I can imagine it would be hard. People are very set in their ways, but yes, it really opens up the opportunities for us small guys to achieve big things. And it's something I'm very excited about.
I think what I've heard people talking about is now how these big businesses can now monetize, whether that's an external monetization or an internal monetization, by applying internal large language models to their own data sets internally. They can do things and then either make that available on a subscription basis, or they can monetize it through slapping an API on it and charging for API calls to their data set. You look at somebody like Reddit, who wants to go public hopefully later this year, and up until now they've made it open slather for free that ChatGPT could connect to their API and pull down all the data from Reddit and train their large language models on it. And now they're going to charge a fortune. And in fact, there's been blackouts on Reddit of major subreddits saying, hey, this is going to make it untenable for small app developers to make use of Reddit data because it's going to be so expensive that only the big boys will be able to afford to access this data. But then there was, I think it was Forbes or one of the very, very other large companies that has this massive cohort of data, from articles to research to spreadsheets to analysis, all this stuff that they historically have charged people mainly for access to their content in the form of, say, weekly or monthly articles to Forbes. Now what they're saying is, we're going to make our research available via API so that other people can take that and build upon that, and we're going to monetize it in that way. And so I think some of these big companies, it's not necessarily about how can we use ChatGPT to make us more efficient, although there's part of that. It's how can we apply large language models to data that we maybe have been collecting over a decade or more, and then how can we turn that into something useful that can be consumed by third parties? That feels a super opportunity for the biggest businesses. Yeah,
big time. Who knows when Oracle decides to charge the ability to people use ChatGPT to write their scripts.
Exactly, and why wouldn't you just write ChatGPT? What I have found with a lot of these applications is they're integrating ChatGPT into the platform in the back end to where you can access it, and it just adds more value to the platform. So there's several live chat platforms out there now that have ChatGPT integrated with them, and where queries can be sent off. So basically, you can flick a switch, and once ChatGPT indexes your internal data, so let's say you've got an internal help desk attached to your live chat platform, which a lot of live chat platforms do, from Gorgeous to Zendesk to all the rest, then by flicking that switch, it will go in and it will index all of your help desk articles, all of your responses. It will look at all the queries that have come into your help desk and all the responses that you've given via live chat, via email, via help desk. It will index all of that information. And then in the first response, when someone makes a chat request to you, basically what that does is then the initial response will always go via automated chat, via ChatGPT. And basically the person can opt out and ask for a human, but that initial response is oftentimes better than what a human who would have to maybe put in a search in the back end in the help desk to pull up the article and then paste the link into the live chat that the person can follow to. ChatGPT can do that faster than the human could. That once all that internal knowledge has been assimilated by the large language model, it can do things faster and better than your humans can. And so I think that level of integration into apps is going to become more common. And I believe if NetSuite was smart, in the interface where you create suite scripts, if you could just use human language and say, I want to do this, and then it would spit out the suite script for you using ChatGPT that was maybe perhaps refined by NetSuite as part of their large language model that has been indexed internally at NetSuite. Can you imagine how much more value if you didn't have to copy and paste into ChatGPT and then back out again and then back into NetSuite? If it was all a native function inside NetSuite, imagine how much extra value you would see in NetSuite because of that native integration. So I think we're going to start seeing that more and more with apps.
Yeah, and that was my thought. Just with this, the power that I can do this with and extend this platform, not all platforms have the ability to extend themselves, to have that sandbox where I can do that. That's one of the great powers of NetSuite, is that I can do this, as opposed to, say, how can I work within the bounds of this fixed SaaS platform or whatever it is to extend it. A lot of them just don't have that ability. So I feel like that's also another place where these platforms need to go to give you the ability to extend. If maybe they don't want to be all things to everyone, but there's definitely an opportunity there.
Well, look, May, I think you have absolutely hit on a gold mine for your business in how to leverage ChatGPT, and what people like Jason Calacanis have said and other people in the industry is they've said you need to pay for ChatGPT Plus for your team members to get the most out of this, to where they can all use it in an unlimited way. You also need to allow them, and you need to allocate time for them in their schedule. You need to allocate time and set aside time for them so that they can actually play, so that they can, without fear of retribution and saying, oh, why are you playing with that technology that's a waste of bloody time? You actually need to encourage it by saying, hey, every Friday or every Thursday or whatever it is, we're all going to have 3 hours or 2 hours or whatever it is that's going to be set aside for you to effectively, up until that time of the week, you're going to just make some notes about different things that you'd like to try with ChatGPT and what you'd like to test out on ChatGPT. And then come this time every week, we're all going to be playing, we're all going to be learning, we're all going to be testing together, and maybe you even get everybody into a room at the same time where they're playing and they're learning, and then they're sharing what they've learned with everybody else in the room. And so I think, however you do it, you've got to create in an environment that doesn't create a climate of fear around the technology, but it creates a climate of excitement. And not just acceptance, but embrace of the technology. And creating an environment where people feel excited and enthused to see what they can do with the technology to make their life better. And the way that I think about this is, it's like when I go in to talk to B2B businesses about B2B e-commerce, oftentimes the biggest resistors initially are the salespeople, because they're like, oh, we don't really want to figure out this B2B e-commerce thing because you're just going to replace us all with B2B e-commerce, aren't you? No, actually, we're going to just take away a lot of the manual admin crap of you having to input orders manually into an ERP, and we're going to offload that to e-commerce, and then you can do all the stuff that you love, and the bits about your job that you love, we're going to allow you to double down on that and go out and build relationships and go on site visits and secure new products for existing customers and negotiate trade deals and all those things. You're going to be able to do all that stuff that you love to do, and we're going to basically take away all the crap you hate doing, and we're going to offload that to an automated system. And I feel like ChatGPT, that's almost maybe how we have to sell it, is, hey, we're not trying to replace you with ChatGPT. We're just trying to take all the crap away that you don't really like to do anyway, and we're going to let you do the stuff you really love to do. Would you say that's a better way to go about getting acceptance within the business?
Yes, totally. And definitely that freedom, that space to have the freedom, big time. Yeah.
And I guess it comes from the top, right? I guess now that you're leading the way and you're saying, I'm doing this, and this is what I've got out of it, and this is what I've learned, you're leading by example. You're leading from the front. And obviously, if you're doing that, then that gives the signal to the rest of the team, oh, I can actually go and do this too because Ryan's done it and he's the boss and he's seen great results. So maybe that means I can go and do it too.
Yeah. Another example is working on for instance, a blog post and giving a little example of what it can do and sharing that and seeing, here, this is what the output really was. Look, there are little bits here that are wrong that could be improved. That's something that we can work with it, and you can use your expertise to make it stronger. Yeah. It's here to work with.
Amazing stuff, Ryan. I think this is going to be potentially one of our favorite mentoring moments, episodes ever. I appreciate you sharing your knowledge. I appreciate you sharing your enthusiasm and your excitement for how ChatGPT is improving your business. And hey, NetSuite people, if you're out there and you're listening, integrate ChatGPT into NetSuite because Ryan's already doing it. Have a conversation with him, and he can help you. Really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks for reaching out, Jason. Great to speak with you.
If you'd like to get mentored by Jason for free, head over to greenwoodconsulting.net, scroll to the bottom of the page, and click Get Mentored by Jason.